Today, I'll be reading some interesting Reddit stories, and while I do that, I'll be building my first base in this new world. So get comfortable, grab something to eat or a drink, sit back, and enjoy. My spouse cheated, and 7 months later, I still feel like she's a piece of shit. About 7 months ago, I found out my spouse slept with one of our good friends. This wasn't just some random guy. He came to our baby shower. We'd gone to concerts together, hiking trips, all that kind of stuff. I trusted him. He was also engaged, and honestly, he treated his fiancée like crap for years. He'd complain about her, but every time someone asked if he was going to leave, he'd always say no. As bad as the cheating was, that's honestly not even the part that sticks with me the most. A few years ago, my wife found out she had HPV during a routine doctor's appointment. We have both had previous partners, so there was never really any point in trying to figure out who gave it to who. I just assumed I probably had it too, and we moved on with our lives. Then, around 6 months before the affair, she actually had to have surgery because of complications from HPV, so there was no question she still had it. He knew that. She knew that he knew, and they still decided not to use protection. I don't know why, that's the part my brain keeps coming back to, but it is. He willingly put himself at risk, knowing full well he'd probably keep sleeping with his fiancée. My wife knew he wasn't planning on leaving her either. She knew there was a very real chance that another woman could end up exposed because of what they were doing, and neither of them seemed to care. Then my wife caught feelings for him. Turns out he didn't feel the same way. He straight up told her he wasn't leaving his fiancée, and somehow they still decided they were just going to stay friends after all of this. Eventually I found out. Things blew up. There was a lot of yelling. I said things I'm not proud of saying, but I never got physical and never would. I packed my stuff and moved out. I've been in therapy ever since. We've been trying couples therapy too. The weird thing is, the more therapy I've done, the less I think the affair itself is the biggest problem. It's what it says about her. She didn't just betray me, she knowingly helped another guy cheat on his fiancée while fully understanding there was a chance that woman could be exposed to HPV because of them. That's not just making a bad decision, that's looking at another innocent person and deciding they don't matter. That realization messed me up more than I expected, so I told his fiancée everything. Every time I found out they were still talking, I told her again. Maybe some people think I should have stayed out of it, I don't know. But if I was in her shoes, I'd want someone to tell me. She deserved to know who she was sharing a bed with and what choices were being made behind her back. Now we're still in couples therapy, and I'm trying, I really am, but I keep running into the same wall. People always talk about rebuilding trust after cheating. Maybe that's possible. I honestly don't know anymore. What I don't know how to rebuild is respect, because every time I look back at everything that happened, I don't just see someone who had an affair. I see someone who made one selfish decision after another, over and over again, and never really stopped to think about who else she could be hurting. 7 months later, I think that's the part I can't get past. I don't know if I'll ever stop looking at her and thinking she's just kind of a piece of shit. Yeah, this one's rough. I kept thinking it was just gonna be another cheating story, but then the HPV part came up and, I don't know, that kind of changed how I looked at the whole thing. Like, cheating is one thing, it's already horrible, but knowingly putting someone else at risk who had absolutely no clue. That's where I just kind of sat there thinking, what were either of them actually thinking? And the guy, honestly, screw that guy. He comes to your baby shower, goes on trips with you, acts like your friend, and then does this. That's bad enough on its own, but then he knows about the HPV, doesn't use protection anyway, and still goes back to his fiancée? I genuinely don't get it. Maybe I'm missing something, but it just sounds unbelievably selfish. Your wife is the part I'm a little more conflicted on, but not because I think what she did is okay. It's more because people do really stupid things when they're caught up in affairs, but I don't know, this feels bigger than that. It wasn't just cheating. It was all the choices around it. She knew he wasn't leaving his fiancée, she knew there was another woman who could get hurt by this in more ways than one, and she still kept going. That's the bit I can't really defend, no matter how I try to look at it. I actually think the line about losing respect hit harder than saying you lost trust. Trust getting broken after cheating is almost expected. Respect is different. Once you start seeing someone as, I don't know, selfish or just lacking basic decency, it's really hard to put that back together. I can kind of see why therapy isn't fixing that part for you. The only thing I'm slightly on the fence about is telling his fiancée every single time they stayed in contact. Telling her the first time? Yeah, I honestly think she deserved to know. I'd want someone to tell me too. After that though, I'm not saying you were wrong because I can completely understand why you kept doing it. I just wonder if it was helping her at that point or if it was also keeping you trapped in all this anger. I'm genuinely not sure. Overall though, yeah, I don't think you're crazy for feeling the way you do. 7 months really isn't that long after finding out something like this. Reading it, it doesn't even sound like you're stuck on the sex anymore. It sounds like you're struggling with the fact that the person you thought you married maybe wasn't the person you thought she was. And honestly, I think that's a much harder thing to get over than the affair itself. I think my fiance broke up with me over text. My fiance was away on a work trip until March 15th. She left on Wednesday, and from then until Sunday, she barely spoke to me. She would read my messages, but never reply. When I tried to FaceTime her on Thursday night, she answered, barely engaged in the conversation, then said, "I guess we have nothing to talk about," before hanging up while I was asking about her day. On Sunday night, she finally texted me, saying she was in a weird headspace and wanted to talk when she got back. She said she felt like we should both be happy all the time, and lately we hadn't been. I asked her if she wanted to break up. She replied, "Not like this. We have a lot of details to work out, and I don't want it to be a tough couple of months." I asked again and even offered to move out immediately. She only responded that she didn't know what to do about the living arrangements and that we could talk later. I honestly had no idea what to do. We had just signed a lease together, paying 50-50. She earned about $60,000 a year, while I made around $40,000. My parents lived only 30 minutes away, so I could stay with them until I got back on my feet. She was also about to receive another $3,000 to $5,000 from this work trip. The thought of staying roommates with someone who had just ended our engagement made me sick. When I asked why this was happening, she told me I wasn't mature enough for her and that I needed to grow up. At that point, I couldn't even decide whether the relationship was worth saving anymore. She wouldn't even give me the decency of a phone call. A couple of days later, I couldn't sleep. It was 1 a.m. and my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. I couldn't understand how someone could go from telling me, "I love you so much, I'm so glad you're mine," to saying, "We're not compatible anymore, and I've been pretending to be happy for the last 3 months." It made everything feel fake. Did she ever really mean it when she said she loved me, or was she only staying because it was comfortable? Every answer my mind came up with only made things worse. The hardest part wasn't just losing my girlfriend, I lost my best friend too. All I wanted was to rest my head in her lap one more time and hear her tell me everything would be okay. Instead, I was lying alone in an empty king-size bed, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes I'd torture myself, imagining her with someone else. I'd picture another man loving her the way I used to. It crushed me. I kept wondering why everything I gave her wasn't enough. How do you fix your mind after something like that? How do you stop those thoughts from taking over? Not long afterward, I tried online dating for the first time. I had no idea what I was doing. I even wondered if it was okay to ask people right away whether they were looking for a serious relationship, a hookup, or just friends with benefits. I didn't want to waste anyone's time, including my own. A few months later, everything started to change. I always remembered a quote: "When we hit our lowest point, we are open to the greatest change." At one point, I was supposed to be getting married that weekend. Instead, my fiancée had left me. Looking back, I realized that throughout our relationship, she had emotionally and verbally abused me. At the same time, work was miserable. My boss criticized everything I did and constantly looked for reasons to write me up. Whenever I tried talking to him about what was going on, he'd tell me to schedule a meeting because he didn't have time for my problems. I felt completely trapped, so I started seeing a therapist. The more we talked, the more one quote from Uncle Iroh kept echoing in my head. It's time for you to look inward and start asking yourself the big question: who are you and what do you want? So I finally asked myself that question. I realized I was already at rock bottom. If I was already there, taking a leap couldn't make things any worse. That leap turned out to be exactly what I needed. I accepted a job offer with a new company. For the first time in months, I felt excited about the future. The negative voice of my ex slowly disappeared from my mind. The chains of grief and depression started falling away. I finally saw light again. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. Sometimes you have to take the leap before you can see where you'll land. You'll never escape the place you're in if you're too afraid to move. 18 months later, after countless dates and plenty of disappointment, I finally met someone incredible. We matched online and instantly clicked. Our conversations were effortless. The chemistry that started through text carried over into our first date, and after that we started seeing each other a couple of times every week. Eventually, we deleted our dating apps. It felt amazing knowing I no longer had to pour my energy into endless swiping. Instead, I could focus all of that energy on one person. Looking back, I also realized how much taking care of myself had helped. Improving my hygiene, skincare, dental care, and overall appearance gave me confidence and made a difference. About 2 years after we matched, I proposed. Finding the right person through online dating came down to 2 things: chemistry and timing. Chemistry tells you whether you're right for each other. Timing decides whether your paths cross at the right moment. A few years later, we got married. We had matched on Hinge 4 years earlier. We were engaged 2 years later. And after she finished her master's degree, we got married in Jamaica. She truly is the love of my life. 5 years earlier, I thought my world had ended because someone broke up with me through a text message. Now, I can honestly say, I'm grateful it happened, because if it hadn't, I never would have met my wife. I don't really know what to say after this one. At first, I honestly felt terrible for him. Getting broken up with over text by the person you're supposed to marry, that's just cold. 5 years together, an engagement, a shared apartment, and that's how it ends? But at the same time, I don't think this story is really about the breakup. It's about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you ends up pushing you toward a better life. When he was lying awake at 1 a.m, convincing himself he'd never get over her, he had no idea that a few years later he'd be married to someone who actually loved him the way he deserved. Life's kinda weird like that. You can be completely convinced that you've lost the best thing you'll ever have, and years later realize you were just standing at the beginning of something better. I don't know if everything happens for a reason, but I do think some endings only make sense once you've lived long enough to see what came after them. Am I the jerk for resenting my dad because of his new family and for seeing my stepfather as a better dad than him? When I was little, my parents were divorced, but I still had a wonderful relationship with my dad. I spent weekdays with my mom and weekends with him, and those weekends became my favorite part of life. We'd rent movies, go fishing, play soccer, and ride our bikes to a hidden playground near the zoo. Back then, he was my best friend. My dad constantly dated different women, but none of those relationships lasted very long. That never really affected me until I was 12, when he met the woman who would become his wife. She had 2 daughters, and within weeks, they had moved into my dad's apartment. Suddenly, my tiny bedroom wasn't really mine anymore. My bed was pushed into a corner to make room for their furniture. Sometimes my mattress was stored in a closet while I wasn't there, and they even forgot to take it back out before I visited. When they eventually moved into a bigger house, the older daughter got her own room while I had to share with the younger one every weekend. Even the little storage space I had slowly disappeared because her toys became more important than my belongings. As time passed, I visited less and less. Things became even worse when my dad's girlfriend got pregnant. They got married without telling me, and I didn't even know my little half-sister had been born until weeks after she came home from the hospital. My dad poured all of his time, money, and attention into his new family. He stopped paying child support, paid for his stepdaughter's college, spoiled everyone in the house, and completely abandoned the routines we once shared. Meanwhile, my stepdad had been part of my life since I was 5 years old. I'd always kept my distance because, years earlier, my biological father had made me feel guilty for loving another man like a father. But as I got older, I realized my stepdad had always been kind, patient, and supportive. He treated me like his own daughter. My biological father became someone I barely recognized. Whenever I visited, he talked endlessly about politics, conspiracy theories, or his business. If I tried to tell him about my own life, he'd interrupt me or lose interest. I eventually learned that my parents hadn't divorced because they simply grew apart. He had cheated on my mom. By the time I turned 15, I had changed completely. I no longer cared about soccer or the beach. I loved books, music, and writing. I'd already published 2 novels and was working on a third. My stepdad proudly told everyone about my accomplishments, while my biological father dismissed my dream of becoming a writer. At his house, I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was a guest. Over the following months, my dad kept calling every Friday asking if I wanted to visit. Most of the time, I was busy with school, friends, or writing. Eventually, my mom insisted I go. The visit confirmed everything I'd been feeling. The entire drive to his house was spent listening to him talk about his new family. At the house, his older stepdaughter ignored me completely, while the younger one had friends using the bed I was supposed to sleep in. His wife barely hid how annoyed she was that I was there. Most of the weekend was spent following my dad and my toddler half-sister around playgrounds while he expected me to babysit. When I came home, I begged my mom not to make me go anymore. Eventually, I wrote my father a long message explaining how abandoned I felt. Instead of apologizing, he called me screaming. He told me I was spoiled, dramatic, and only cared about money because I mentioned the unpaid child support. After I hung up, he left me a voicemail claiming he was broke and reminding me that he loved me. I knew he wasn't broke. I constantly saw expensive gifts he bought for his new family. That was when I started giving up. I asked my mom if my stepdad could adopt me. She told me he didn't think it was right because it would hurt my biological father's feelings. That answer crushed me. Still, my stepdad continued treating me with kindness. He called me his daughter, supported my dreams, and loved me in ways my own father no longer did. I decided to stop chasing my father's approval. One final visit convinced me there was no saving our relationship. I excitedly shared a business idea about selling handmade book boxes. He immediately called it stupid. The rest of the drive became argument after argument. He mocked my college dreams, ranted about immigrants, insulted my friends, criticized volunteer work I wanted to do, and launched into sexist speeches about women. He claimed almost all women were greedy, shouldn't earn more than their husbands, and existed to depend on rich men. Then he'd smile at me and say, "But you're different." I wasn't flattered. I was disgusted. When I got home and told my mom everything, she finally started considering legal action for custody and child support. I had given him one last chance. He wasted it. A few months later, my mom still pressured me into visiting him. Nothing had changed. He argued with me over everything from women exercising in leggings to his belief that women only dressed for male attention. He constantly insulted his wife while preaching about how women should behave. By then, every ounce of respect I had left for him was gone. Around the same time, another painful truth shattered the image I'd built of my stepdad. During a conversation about adoption, he admitted he didn't believe adopted children could ever be loved the same as biological ones. Then I learned something else. Years earlier, he had cheated on my mom too. The man I believed was everything my biological father wasn't had made the same betrayal. I suddenly felt like I had no father figure at all. Life slowly moved forward anyway. I focused on school. I kept writing books. I worked hard towards scholarships and college because I knew the only real escape was building a future for myself. 2 years later, my life looked completely different. Unfortunately, I also discovered that my grandfather had spent decades cheating on my grandmother and had recently fathered a child with a woman barely older than me. It felt like infidelity ran through every generation of my family. I finally cut him out of my life. At my high school graduation, my biological father arrived late, refused to sit with the rest of my family, disappeared before the ceremony ended, and later called to yell at me for supposedly abandoning him. That was the last straw. Soon after, we met one final time at a water park. For about 10 minutes, everything was peaceful. Then he asked about college. When I told him I was majoring in biomedical engineering at a university connected with NASA, he launched into conspiracy theories about astronauts never going to space, NASA being fake, and my degree existing to create biological weapons. We screamed at each other. He insulted my mother. He insulted me. I got into my car, drove away, blocked his number, and never looked back. Today, I'm preparing to start university. I worked incredibly hard to earn my place there. I've become healthier, physically and emotionally. I found hobbies that helped me heal, made amazing friends, and built confidence I never had before. For the first time in years, I'm excited about the future. I'm moving away from the toxicity that defined my childhood. I'm decorating my own room, pursuing the career I've dreamed of, continuing to write books, and building a life that belongs entirely to me. My story isn't about losing a father anymore. It's about finally finding myself. Man, this whole thing just pissed me off. The part that got me wasn't even the cheating or the politics or the conspiracy theories. It was how this girl kept giving her dad chance after chance. Every time I thought, okay, this is it, she's finally done, she'd go back hoping maybe he'd act like the dad she remembered, and every single time he'd prove her wrong. The line that really hit me was when she said she was basically a guest in his house. That's brutal. Imagine going to your own dad's house and feeling like you're visiting someone else's family. And honestly, I don't think the dad even realized what he was doing. He probably thought, I still tell her I love her, so what's the problem? But love isn't saying the words once in a while. It's making your kid feel like they matter. He completely failed at that. I also feel bad for the girl because she spent years wondering if she was the problem. That's what makes it sad. Kids almost always blame themselves first. They think, maybe if I visited more, maybe if I called more. When in reality, she was the child. It wasn't her job to fix the relationship. The mom frustrated me too. I know she was probably trying to keep the peace, but if your daughter is crying after every visit, why are you still making her go? At some point, you have to stop hoping the other parent magically changes. The stepdad, man, he was complicated. I was actually rooting for him. He seemed like the one decent father figure she had. Then he dropped that whole adopted kids can't be loved the same thing, and I just sat there like, why would you say that to someone who's basically your daughter? That was such an unnecessary thing to say. And then the cheating, it just felt like another punch to the gut. By the end, I honestly wasn't even angry anymore. I was just relieved she walked away. Her dad is probably going to wake up one day, years from now, wondering why his daughter never calls. And he'll probably convince himself she was ungrateful instead of admitting he pushed her away little by little over the years. The thing that made me smile was the ending. Not because everything got fixed, it didn't, but because she stopped chasing someone who clearly wasn't willing to be the father she needed. She focused on college, her books, her friends, and her own future. Sometimes that's the healthiest ending you can get. My dad embarrassed me in a packed movie theater. I convinced my father to go watch The Odyssey with me. What I expected to be a wholesome father-son bonding experience ended up being an awkward situation that became nightmare fuel. My fuck-up was set in motion the moment my dad and I arrived at the cinema and realized The Odyssey was almost sold out. It was opening weekend. I should have booked online in advance, but it was the first screening of the day, and I thought not many people were going to show up for the earliest show. I was wrong. Limited seats were available. My dad and I had one of two choices. Choice number one, we select any of the normal seats available, but then we would not be sitting together. Choice number two, we select the love seat, which is basically two seats merged into one so that couples can sit as close to each other as possible. My dad opted for the love seat instead of the random seats that would separate us. Before I could even think of suggesting anything else, my dad said if I was worried about what strangers might think, then I should stop because no one was going to pay any attention to us. Cut to my dad and I awkwardly moving down a crowded row. My dad was leading the way. We were repeatedly saying excuse me or sorry because people had to make space for us to pass. Would my dad not interrupt his own sorry excuse me to ask a random girl if the available seat next to her was the seat reserved for couples? The girl looked confused at first, but then she nodded. My dad turned to me and said, "Found the love seat." I was practically hiding my face behind my popcorn at that moment. As my dad and I sat down, he thanked the girl for assisting him, and then he decided to specifically introduce me as his son, which would have been fine if that was where it ended. However, my dad thought it would be funny to tell the girl how afraid I was that people were going to think we were together. I could tell the girl was caught off guard by the continuation of the conversation, but she was kind enough to at least pretend she cared. My dad attempted to include me in the conversation by encouraging me to repeat the word I used earlier when the two of us were still debating the love seat situation. I refused to repeat the word, but my dad kept asking until I finally said, "Twink, Dad, twink." My dad snapped his fingers like he just heard me say something that was on the tip of his tongue before he made it clear to the girl that even though we're sitting where couples usually sit, we were not twinking. I interrupted my dad and made him aware that he might be bothering the girl. My dad apologized and left the girl alone. I thought the worst was over until my dad leaned in during the movie and quietly asked if it was twinking if a father wanted to put his arm around the shoulder of his son in the love seat. I said the word was twink and he was using it wrong. But I was okay with my dad putting his arm around my shoulder. Not gonna lie, the experience was somewhat embarrassing, but I still appreciated spending time with my dad. Anyway, not the craziest fuck up compared to what I've seen on here, but it definitely had moments I wish never happened. Honestly, this wasn't even a bad dad. It just sounds like a dad who loves embarrassing his kid for fun. The secondhand embarrassment is real, but I can't help laughing. At least they'll probably remember this movie forever. A kid climbs into an old dog crate, gets stuck, and his mom blames us. My sister has a neighbor we'll call Karen, not her real name. Karen has two younger kids who are pretty normal, and an older stepchild, I think, who we'll call Dumb Kid. He has a habit of making terrible decisions. My sister had family over for Independence Day. We showed up around noon to start smoking meat and hanging out. Karen's kids were playing in their yard. We could hear them being the normal amount of loud for kids, but they weren't ours, so none of us were really paying attention. My sister had two very large German shepherds. One of them passed away about 2 years ago, and the old dog crate was still sitting unused in the shed. The latches on it had always been a pain. They'd stick about half the time, and you'd need a pair of pliers to get them open. By the time I was on my third beer, we suddenly heard screaming coming from the shed. Turns out Dumb Kid had climbed into the dog crate, somehow managed to shut the door behind himself, and the latch jammed. His younger siblings couldn't get him out. To their credit, the moment we showed up to see what was happening, both of them immediately ran to get their mom. It took maybe 5 seconds for us to realize the latch was stuck, so my brother-in-law went to grab a pair of pliers. While he was gone, Karen came running over. The second Dumb Kid saw his mom, he started screaming even louder, and Karen joined in. Her greatest hits included, "Why is he in there? Get him out! Why is he in there?" The level of panic was completely unnecessary. The kid wasn't in any immediate danger, and we were already working on getting him out. I stayed with him, told him we were getting some tools, and assured him we'd have him out in a minute. Karen didn't know any of that because she just kept screaming. By the time my brother-in-law got back, my sister had joined us and I had filled her in on what happened. He used the pliers, popped the latch open, and Dumb Kid climbed out completely unharmed aside from maybe a bruised ego. That wasn't enough for Karen. She kept yelling, insisting this was somehow our fault. We explained that we never expected someone to open the shed, climb into an old dog crate, and lock themselves inside. We also told her we'd remove the crate door so it couldn't happen again. None of that mattered. She acted like we deliberately set a trap for neighborhood kids. We hadn't. We just underestimated how creative a kid could be when making bad decisions. Eventually, Karen stormed off, but not before spending several more minutes yelling at everyone. My brother-in-law calmly told her that no one had been hurt, the situation was over, and she needed to go home and calm down. The biggest thing that stands out is that this was an accident, not someone's negligence. The kid made a genuinely reckless decision. Climbing into an old dog crate, closing the door behind yourself, and ending up trapped isn't something most adults would anticipate. Kids are curious, and they do incredibly dumb things. That's part of growing up. This is one of those moments where the child learned the hard way that curiosity can have consequences. The adult's response is what matters most to me. From what's described, nobody ignored the kid, nobody laughed at him, and nobody wasted time. They immediately figured out the problem, got the right tool, kept him calm, and got him out. That's exactly what I'd hope people would do. Now, Karen, her initial panic is completely understandable. If I heard my child screaming from inside a cage, I'd probably have an adrenaline rush too. Parents aren't robots. Where I start judging her is after those first few seconds. Once she could clearly see people were already helping, continuing to scream wasn't helping anyone. More importantly, blaming everyone else instead of asking what actually happened is unfair. Her son wasn't trapped because someone locked him in. He put himself there. I also don't like the mindset of acting as if every accident needs a villain. Sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes a kid does something unbelievably stupid and the result is an embarrassing lesson. Trying to shift all responsibility onto someone else teaches the child that their own choices don't matter. On the other hand, I'd also say your sister's family made the right decision by removing the crate door afterward. Not because they were at fault, but because once you've discovered something can become a hazard, there's no reason to leave it that way.